Hi, friends. This is Dr. Arpita Gupta Dipalma, and you're listening to my podcast, From Pissed Off to Poised. This show is for busy women physicians and professionals just like you who are ready to take control of their emotions while learning how to excel in juggling all the things they are responsible for in life. It's for overextended mamas who are trying to figure out how to work smarter, not harder. It's for multitasking women who are tired of playing the role of the angry and resentful air traffic controller, who simply want to learn how to create a life that is more calm, intentional, and joyful for themselves. My goal is to help you learn how to eliminate the overwhelm and maintain your composure in high-stress situations that you face with the demands in your day-to-day life. Because I get you guys, this was totally me. You are not alone. I invite you to embark on your journey of transformation with me. Enjoy the listen. Hi there. Welcome back to another episode of From Pissed Off to Poised. Today, we're talking about something that I think we all crave, but we often struggle to create in our own adult lives. And that's authentic connections with other people. I'm not talking about these surface level friendships. I'm talking about deep, meaningful, soul nourishing connections where we feel truly connected to other individuals, where we can let our guard down, where we can be who we really are, where we can let go of any worry about offending the persons that we're with because we know there's unconditional love. And if you're anything like me, maybe you've noticed that building and maintaining these type of friendships as we get older in adulthood feels really hard, much harder than maybe we had expected. So I want to share a personal story without going too deep into the details, but to give you just enough context to kind of understand how our traumas in our past oftentimes impact how we show up later in our lives. And we don't even necessarily have awareness around this happening. So I'm going to tie in a little bit of trauma work that we talked about with the first couple episodes, along with a little bit of the time management work here, because the investment of time into cultivating these connections is something that we have to be very intentional about. And when we have situations or scenarios that impacted our past in a way that prevents us from making this be as easy as it could be, it requires us to spend even more time and have more intentionality with cultivating these connections. So as I've probably referred to, I was raised with really strong cultural roots and traditions, my parents being from India. And I knew I also was growing up feeling that I was a little bit different from the majority of the people that were around me, having been born in New York and raised in the US. And that early experience of feeling like an outsider planted some deep seeds very early on. And over time, I learned how to blend in and how to fit in and be part of the group, to show up and do all the right things. But a piece of me was still always longing for a deeper sense of belonging with my culture within the community, to be with my people. And so when we fast forward here and I look at my past life, I spent years in a beautifully culturally rich local group of friends where our kids grew up together. We celebrated traditions. We had a really strong sense of community, and it truly was a gift. This is my upbringing when I was a kid. And I was fortunate enough to offer that and cultivate that for my own kids as I got older and had my own family start. But as life shifted, even with my own kids, they began to leave the nest. Our little group of people, the kids got older, everybody went their own way. COVID hit, routines changed, and it became really hard to maintain that connection, and they started to fade. And even though we all had busy lives, it is really hard to not take that silence and that distance personally over time. And that was leading to a feeling of maybe some rejection, some abandonment, some dismissal, feeling of being forgotten, not really included or important anymore. And I know in the back of my head, I knew this wasn't really true, but ultimately feelings get hurt over time when we notice that the connections are not as strong. And it's due to this sense of grief that comes in, oftentimes, that we're not even willing to acknowledge or allow for. And because I'm a fiercely loyal friend, and I really, really put a lot of energy and effort in the friendships that I choose to allow into my life, I continue to try to keep breathing life into these friendships until I really started to hit a wall. And I really started to recognize that I wasn't showing up as my best self anymore with the people that I was trying to spend more time with. I was becoming resentful, closed off, and honestly, a little bit bitter, and not really allowing myself to be present with the people that I wanted to be present with in the way I knew I could be. And so I started protecting myself before anyone could hurt me again, and really started focusing on the other friendships that I had, most of which were out of state or virtual or with other circles of friends. And that's how that friendship kind of evolved. That's how my life evolved with regards to cultivating friendships. But when I really started to do some deeper work on why I was taking this to heart, why this was so painful for me, why it was so personal, I eventually traced it back to something much earlier in my childhood. It's like essentially a childhood betrayal where I was excluded from a group activity and then lied to about it. This happened back in fifth grade. And I had really not much recollection about it until I started working with my coach around why the current fading of friendship had become so painful. At the time, I didn't really make much sense of it, right? When I was left out from that group activity in fifth grade. But it left a wound, and that wound stuck. And my brain decided at that moment that I couldn't always trust everybody, that friendships were good, but they weren't always safe. And so, decades later, when some of these adult friendships started fading or shifting, the old belief flared back up where my mind offered, they don't really care about you. They're all hanging out without you. This feeling of friendship isn't mutual. And these are the sentences that were constantly running in my brain that were truly impacting how I was showing up with the people I was interacting with. And I know I'm not alone in this. I think a lot of us have had scenarios where we might have been bullied in childhood or excluded from groups or just not feeling like we belonged. And I want to offer to you guys that if you can start to give yourself some compassion and grace to recognize that this might be part of your past, that you might be able to start to unravel why it might be so difficult to make and maintain friendships as you get older. So I want you to just think about it, to notice it, because I don't think I'm alone in this. I think the majority of people have insecurities regarding friendships and their friendships with people and how they are perceived by other people. And I'm here to tell you, I think a lot of it, unfortunately, are sentences that we make up in our mind. It's really wild how long we carry these emotional memories, how these sentinel events or micro traumas can really shape our ability to connect with other people. As Resmaa Menakem says, trauma is anything that happens too fast, too soon, too long, coupled without enough of what should have been resourcing. Friendship is supposed to be one of those resourcing things. But so many of us end up isolated because we're afraid of being vulnerable because of events that happened when we were younger, childhood events that might be kind of stored up in our brain and our life brain where we aren't always necessarily aware of it, but we notice that it's there. So even when we have good people around us, it makes sense why we can get caught up in these loops in our mind. They're too busy for me. Maybe I'm not trying hard enough. Screw it. I don't really care. They're not my people. Again, this is the back and forth internal chatter that your brain might be offering. The fact of the matter is, it's exhausting. It takes up space. It takes up energy. And most importantly, it takes your joy. I was almost 50 when I realized just how much this was impacting me and how I needed to be intentional with who I was allowing in my circle and how I wanted to cultivate those connections moving forward. And that's what I try to do, and I'm still evolving in this process. So I want to talk about why this is so important, why connection with other humans is so important, not just emotionally, but also physically. Have you ever heard of the blue zones? I think a lot of us at this point have. These are the regions of the world with the highest percentage of people who live to be over 100 years of age. They've identified 9 common traits of longevity. And not surprisingly, the number one factor that contributes to our health span is connection. Connection impacts not just our lifespan, but our health span, the quality of our years. Connection literally keeps us alive and well. And yet, most of us are walking around with a primal fear of rejection. We're silently waiting for someone else to make the first move because we're too scared of them not accepting us for who we are, for not being included or feeling like we belong. But here's the truth. If just one person has the courage to say, hey, I like you, let's grab a coffee and maybe see where this goes. I'd love to be your friend. The ripple effect can be unreal. I did this in October in Toronto. I was at a conference with Martha Beck and Liz Gilbert, amazing conference. And while I was there, I saw this beautiful human coming down the aisle, and I'd noticed her maybe earlier that day, just very outgoing and just colorful. Her style was amazing. And I was like, I want to know this woman. It's like I had a girl crush on this person. And so I literally went up to her and I said, I love your energy. I want to be your friend. Let's go grab lunch. And we did. And we've kept in touch and we are friends. Because when you notice the people that have that lit energy in your life, you get to decide how you want to move forward with it. And I'll offer, I get it. It's scary doing things like this, right? Especially when we've had those past sentinel events or traumatic experiences where we might have been bullied. And the point here is that when we can actually start to build awareness around those scenarios or situations that happened in our past, we open the door to begin to heal the residual pain and grief that we might have from those events that are keeping us now from moving forward, from being vulnerable. One of these things that I specifically recognize is that I had a lot of guilt for not giving friendships that were complete grace. The people that I felt like I had history with, that when these friendships were starting to slowly kind of dwindle or end, that I wasn't giving them enough grace for the reasons why the friendships might not be persisting. And what I recognized over time is that I actually needed to give myself grace to be able to grieve the loss of the friendship, the completion of those friendships. Only then, when I started to recognize that it really was nothing about me. It had nothing to do with me that those friendships were no longer as vibrant as they used to be, but rather how phases of life change, how experiences change, how exposure to those people that we were once so close to might have gotten less frequent. All of these factors contributed to the intensity and the availability to actually continue to cultivate those friendships. And so when I gave myself grace to grieve those friendships being complete, rather than beating myself up for not giving other people grace for showing up in a way that I felt a friend should show up, that's when I really started to begin to heal my own wounds. And this is what I want to offer to you. If you can explore why you might be a little bit scared of rejection, why you feel uncomfortable being vulnerable, why it's hard for you maybe to cultivate connections and maintain them, showing up with that curiosity and that love and compassion for yourself is actually what might open the door to recognizing why it all makes sense. Okay. And once you recognize why it all makes sense, you get to decide from there what you want to do next, what type of friendships you want to cultivate now, how many, how intense, groups of people, single people, whatever it is. That's how you get to decide what works for you now and what fills your cup. So that's what we're going to talk about now. I want to give you some practical guidance on how to start cultivating more intentional friendships right now. Okay, first step, you have to get clear on what you want. I want you to think about your current friendships. What do you want more of within these friendships? And what are things that you could kind of do without? For me, when I did this reflection, I started to realize that as I get older, I simply want to be with people who are just real. Okay. They are down to earth, they are kind, and they are real. We're not blowing smoke up each other's asses. There's no BS. We are just really showing up to be there, to support each other, to love each other. And also, we can be there to be curious, to recognize when something is off, and to show up with unconditional love. I wanted people who would commit and then follow through. Unless, of course, there's a life-threatening emergency or some other major event that needed to lead to change. But I was tired of having friendships where people would maybe half-heartedly commit and then not show up or cancel at the last minute or not be able to be dependable for me. I wanted people who were vested and in it for the long run, just like I was. And I wanted people who were just honestly open, kind, loving, dependable, and were tired of dealing with all of the bullshit from younger years. The next thing I started to recognize is that I wanted to find people who would match my energy. Okay. And our energies shift depending on what kind of zone we're in. But in general, when you're around friends and you're wanting to spend time with them, can you find the people who are able to match your energy? And if your energy is low, can they bring you up if that's what you need? If your energy is too high, are they okay with it? Or can you bring yourself down to match theirs if they need some more support? So noticing the energies of the people who you're around, because you can kind of tap into that spidey sense, that intuition, the energy of people for authenticity, for kindness, for support and love. Does it match yours? Do you feel natural, at ease, and just comfortable with them? Who do you kind of automatically just jive with? Don't discard that sense. Don't discard this intuition per se that you have. Listen to it because it's real. It makes a difference in the long term about the energy. I also kind of recognized here very quickly that I had to start to accept that not every connection is going to click, much less last forever. And that doesn't mean that anything was wrong with me. And it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you. It's just not a match. And that's okay. This is again talking about that energy that sometimes we might feel like somebody is our right person, we're jiving, and then as we get to know each other, as the relationship evolves, you notice the differences, and maybe the energy is not quite the same. This doesn't have anything to do with you. This has to do with the fact that people are their own selves, their own beings, and as we evolve through life, our energy changes. Our perspectives change. Our ability to adapt and mold to the environment changes. And so you get to just honor and accept what feels right for you. I think the hardest part, once I started having this recognition, this listening to my inner knowing for what I wanted with my friendships, was then just being brave and being vulnerable enough to ask these humans that I was energetically attracted to that I wanted to spend time with them, that I wanted to hang out with them, get to know them better. And that's because it's so uncomfortable to do this, especially when we don't know somebody well, because of this fear of rejection that we all have. But quite frankly, we've all survived much worse. The worst thing that will happen if you go up to somebody and approach them and say, "Hey, I love your energy. Would you want to go out for a cup of coffee, get to know each other, just be friends?" is that they say no. And if they say no, no big deal. It has nothing to do with you. You get to move on and ask the next person who you find that energy attraction with. So I want you to just practice this, practice being brave, practice being vulnerable to ask somebody who you feel you might have a connection with without being fully vested or even devastated if it isn't a match. It's okay. This is how we find the right people. And then once you have started maybe identifying who are the people that you connect with and establishing this type of relationship, it's really important to create a rhythm. When you do meet up with them, schedule the next one right away, or maybe schedule the next two right away at the first meeting so that thereafter you only have to schedule the next one and you're always 2 months out. This prioritizes the consistency and the commitment of wanting to keep the relationship going. All right. Because life is always going to get in the way. It's always going to cannibalize your time. And this is where you have to be very intentional with your time and prioritize the ability to cultivate this connection. With that, I want to just bring in that rupture is going to be inevitable with any relationship that we have. The breakdown in communication, the misunderstandings, the lack of support at times, the feelings getting hurt. This is part of being willing to be in a relationship. But what matters after a rupture happens is how we repair it. Are we willing to own our part in the rupture? Are we willing to acknowledge any missteps that we may have made? Can we be honest with our own needs and with our boundaries? Sometimes we might sense that something is off, but we're afraid to ask because we don't want to be wrong and then cause a bigger tussle. But I want to offer, if we don't ever ask, it continues to kind of snowball with this what if scenario or these thoughts in our brain, these sentences that we have about something that might not even be there. When tensions rise, I want you to try this instead. Can you let your first thought be, I am for you, and then let that guide how you respond? Sometimes this will allow you to really show up more vulnerable and inquire and ask, hey, did I have a misstep here? Hey, I wanted to see you and it didn't seem to work out. And sometimes it might help you recognize that the energies and the relationships are not really what you were intending for them to be. They're not in alignment, and that's okay. This is what allows you then to move on and figure out what is in alignment for you and what is important, what does fill your cup, what does replenish your soul. And honestly, if a relationship does run its course and it's really not moving forward, let's not label it as a failure, okay? Let's not make it something about us. Let's instead consider it as being complete and it's still being filled with love. Because during the period of time when it was working and good and fulfilling for you, it was joyous and full of love. So why not choose to remember that and decide that it's now complete before you move on to find some other source of that joy? I want to share an excerpt from Brené Brown's Atlas of the Heart, where she speaks about grounded confidence, walking alongside others, and story stewardship. Because I think this passage is so eloquently said and written, and it hints at the difference between how, as humans, we are nice and how instead we can be kind. How do we know what other people are feeling? We ask them. It's only then that we're able to connect with the grounded confidence to engage and the courage to walk alongside. When they tell us what they're feeling, what happened, what they fear or desire, we listen and we become trusted stewards of their stories. We are good stewards of the stories we tell by trusting them to people who have earned the right to hear them and telling them only when we're ready. We are good stewards of the stories we hear by listening, being curious, affirming, and believing people when they tell us how they experience something. The greatest threats to story stewardship are the two near enemies of building narrative trust: narrative tap out and narrative takeover. Rather than building trust by acknowledging, affirming, and believing, we shut people down when we experience discomfort or disinterest, or when we take over the narrative and make it about us or our perception of what happened. Like empathy, story stewardship is not walking in someone else's shoes. It's being curious and building narrative trust as they tell you about the experience of being in their own shoes. That is kindness, in my opinion. That is what cultivates connection, the story stewardship. This is what creates the deep-rooted friendships that last. So here's your challenge for next week. I want you to let your guard down. I want you to share your story. I want you to listen hard to the stories of other people. Make the effort to put yourself out there and meet at least 3 new women this month who could become a part of your own circle of 6. Or if you've recognized that you prefer and thrive on smaller groups or even one-on-one time with people instead, do that because that's what fills your cup. Only you know what works best for you, and it's okay for it to change over time as you evolve through the phases of your life. So share a meal with that new friend, exchange your contact info, and start building something real, because you're worthy of authentic connection, and connection is how we heal. Until next time, I hope this has resonated. We will talk more then. Go make a new friend. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of From Pissed Off to Poised. Remember, transformation is a journey, not a destination. So enjoy the ride. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review From Pissed Off to Poised on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback supports my mission to get this podcast out to help other women physicians and professionals like you on their path to creating a more peaceful life with more intention and more joy. I enjoy reading every message I get with your input and feedback on my journey, so keep them coming. And if you have a friend who might enjoy the listen, please share this episode and share with them. Lastly, if you want to learn more about my coaching programs and course offerings, check out my website at www.thoughtworkmd.com. Feel free to reach out to me to learn more about investing in yourself through one-to-one coaching so you can start living the life you've always wanted. This show is for general educational and entertainment purposes only. Life coaching is not a substitute for therapy or medical treatment.